The warning. The crimson sun of Xerion Prime cast long shadows across the diplomatic chamber as Ambassador Vex Tarl adjusted his ceremonial robes. The Galactic Empire's most decorated negotiator had handled countless species in his 3 centuries of service, but humans remained an enigma that troubled even his experienced mind. Today's meeting would determine the fate of an entire solar system, and possibly much more. Across the polished obsidian table sat Captain Sarah Chen, the human representative whose mere presence had caused ripples of unease throughout the Empire's upper echelons. She appeared deceptively calm, her dark eyes studying the assembled alien dignitaries with the patience of a predator. Behind her stood Commander Marcus Stone, the so-called human hero whose exploits had become legendary across the Outer Rim territories. Stone was not what most aliens expected of a human warrior. Standing just under 6 feet tall with graying temples and laugh lines around his eyes, he looked more like a teacher than a soldier. But those who had witnessed him in action knew better. The scars on his hands told stories of battles fought with primitive weapons against technologically superior foes. The quiet confidence in his posture spoke of victories that should have been impossible. "Commander Stone," Ambassador Vex Tarl began, his voice carrying the authority of 1,000 conquered worlds. "The Empire has grown tired of your interference in our expansion protocols. Your species continues to harbor criminals, rebels, and dissidents who flee imperial justice. This behavior must cease immediately." Stone leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And if it doesn't?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Several alien diplomats shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Keth Mori representative's tentacles writhed with nervous energy, while the crystalline Zephyrians hummed with frequencies that spoke of ancient fears awakening. "Then the Empire will be forced to take decisive action," Vex Tarl replied, his scaled fingers drumming against the table. "We have been patient with humanity's rebellious nature, but our tolerance has limits." Captain Chen spoke for the first time, her voice steady and clear. "Ambassador, with all due respect, you seem to misunderstand the situation. We're not here to negotiate humanity's surrender. We're here to give you a warning." A ripple of confusion passed through the alien delegation. The concept of an inferior species warning the mighty Galactic Empire was so absurd it bordered on comedy. Yet something in the human's demeanor suggested this was no jest. "A warning?" Vex Tarl's laugh was like grinding stone. "What could possibly make you believe you're in a position to threaten us?" Stone stood slowly, his movements deliberate and measured. "Because you don't understand what you're dealing with, Ambassador. You see humans as just another primitive species to be conquered and absorbed. You think our technology is inferior, our numbers insignificant, our resolve easily broken." He walked to the chamber's massive viewport, gazing out at the fleet of Imperial dreadnoughts that bristled with enough firepower to glass a planet. "You're not wrong about our technology or our numbers, but you've made a critical error in judgment about our resolve." The viewport showed the peaceful blue-green world of Haven Colony below, where millions of humans had built their lives among the stars. It was one of dozens of human settlements scattered across this sector, each one a testament to their species' stubborn refusal to be contained. "Your records show our military engagements," Chen continued, pulling up holographic displays that filled the air between them. "What they don't show is why we fight. Every human world, every colony, every ship that stands against you isn't just defending territory. We're defending the idea that consciousness should be free." The tactical displays showed battle after battle where human forces had achieved impossible victories. At Kepler Station, a single human destroyer had held off an entire Imperial squadron for 3 days until reinforcements arrived. On Tau Ceti 7th, human civilians armed with mining equipment had driven off professional soldiers wielding plasma weapons. These victories, Stone said, turning back to face the assembly, they weren't flukes or lucky accidents. They were the result of something your empire has forgotten how to do. Fight for something worth dying for. Ambassador Vex Tyrol's scales had shifted to a darker hue, a sign of growing agitation among his species. Pretty words, Commander, but words won't stop our battle fleets. We have conquered 1,000 species. What makes humans so special? Stone walked back to the table, placing his hands flat on its surface as he leaned forward. Because every other species you've conquered had something to lose. They had homeworlds, governments, infrastructure that could be destroyed or captured. They had populations that could be held hostage, leaders who could be corrupted or replaced. His eyes locked with the ambassadors, and for a moment, the alien diplomat saw something that made his evolutionary instincts scream warnings. Humans are different. We don't have a single homeworld anymore. Earth is just a memory to most of us. Our government is whatever group of people decides to stand together on any given day. Our infrastructure is portable, adaptable, expendable. Chen activated another display, showing the vast network of human settlements, trade routes, and hidden bases that stretched across known space. We're not an empire, Ambassador. We're an idea that's learned how to shoot back. The Kethmori representative finally spoke, his translator converting his species' chemical communications into audible words. You speak of dying for ideals. The Empire offers prosperity, order, peace. Why choose conflict over cooperation? Stone's smile returned, but now it carried an edge that made several aliens unconsciously step back. Because your peace requires us to stop being human. Your order demands we abandon everything that makes life worth living. Your prosperity comes at the cost of our souls. He gestured to his companion. Captain Chen here commands a ship called the Defiant. It's not the biggest or fastest in our fleet, but it carries something your empire will never understand, the combined will of everyone aboard to fight until their last breath rather than live as slaves. The chamber fell silent except for the hum of environmental systems and the distant thrum of the Imperial fleet's engines. Ambassador Vex Tyrol found himself studying these strange creatures who spoke of impossible things as if they were merely stating facts. You still haven't explained this warning you claim to bring, he said finally. Stone straightened, his casual demeanor shifting into something more formal and infinitely more dangerous. The warning is simple, Ambassador. You can choose to leave human space peacefully, maintain our current borders, and continue trade relationships that benefit both our peoples. Or you can choose to escalate this conflict into something that will consume us all. And why should we fear escalation? Vexteral demanded. Our fleets outnumber yours 1,000 to 1. Because, Chen said quietly, when you threaten everything a human holds dear, you don't get a defeated enemy. You get something much worse. Stone nodded grimly. You get humans with nothing left to lose. And a human with nothing left to lose will do things that defy every law of physics, logic, and sanity. We'll fight in ways that break your understanding of warfare. We'll sacrifice everything and everyone, including ourselves, to ensure that if we fall, we take as much of your empire with us as possible. The viewport suddenly filled with the sight of a small human cargo ship making its approach to the diplomatic station. It looked peaceful enough, but Stone's eyes followed its trajectory with the attention of a man watching a loaded gun. That ship carries medical supplies for the colony below, he said conversationally. Food, medicine, basic necessities for people trying to build something beautiful in the darkness between stars. But if you force our hand, Ambassador, ships just like that one will carry something very different. The implications hung in the air like a poison cloud. The Empire's intelligence services had heard whispers of human desperation tactics, weapons that violated every civilized convention, strategies that bordered on madness. We're not monsters, Stone continued, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible possibilities. We don't want to become the thing you'll force us to be. That's why we're here. Talking instead of fighting. That's why we're offering you this chance to walk away. Ambassador Vex Tarol's advanced mind processed thousands of variables, calculating odds, weighing options, analyzing threat assessments. But something in the human's certainty suggested that all his calculations might be missing a crucial factor. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Stone shook his head slowly. "No, Ambassador. We're telling you the true to brats." The Choice 3 standard days had passed since the diplomatic meeting on Zerion Prime, and the response from the Galactic Empire's High Command was exactly what Commander Marcus Stone had expected. The holographic projection of Admiral Crixthon filled the briefing room aboard the human vessel Defiant. His insectoid features twisted with the particular arrogance that came from commanding 10,000 starships. "Commander Stone," the Admiral's translated voice buzzed with mechanical precision. "Your threats have been forwarded to the appropriate authorities and found amusing. The Empire has decided to demonstrate the futility of human resistance once and for all." Stone sat quietly at the conference table, surrounded by his senior staff. Captain Chen's jaw was tight with controlled anger, while Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez's fingers drummed nervously against her datapad. Only Stone himself seemed unmoved by the Admiral's pronouncement, as if he was watching the inevitable unfold according to a script only he could read. "Admiral," Stone said calmly, "I want to be very clear about what you're choosing. This isn't a military conquest anymore. This is you forcing us to become something neither of us wants us to be." Crixthon's compound eyes glittered with predatory satisfaction. "Your psychological warfare tactics are crude, human. In 72 hours, our battle fleets will arrive in force at every human settlement in this sector. You will surrender unconditionally, or you will be eliminated. The Empire has grown tired of your species' delusions of relevance." The transmission ended, leaving the human officers in contemplative silence. Finally, Chen spoke what everyone was thinking. "So that's it then. They've made their choice." Stone nodded slowly, his weathered face carrying the weight of decisions that would reshape the galaxy. "Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, send the activation codes to all human settlements. Protocol 7. Rodriguez's hand hesitated over her console. Protocol 7 was something they had hoped never to use, a final contingency that had been discussed in whispers and planned in shadows. "Sir, are you certain? Once we begin, there's no going back." "There was no going back the moment the Empire decided we weren't worth treating as equals," Stone replied. "Send the codes." Across human space, a network that had taken decades to establish quietly came online. Hidden transmitters activated on thousands of worlds, space stations, and ships. In the depths of asteroid mining facilities, automated systems began their pre-programmed sequences. On agricultural colonies where families had built their dreams among alien soil, emergency protocols engaged with mechanical precision. The plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Humans had spent generations preparing for this moment, not through massive military buildups or technological revolutions, but through a fundamental reimagining of what warfare could become. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, Administrator Sarah Kim received the activation signal while reviewing ore shipment manifests. Without hesitation, she initiated the colony's contribution to Protocol 7. The massive orbital refineries that had processed raw materials for human settlements across the sector began a different kind of work. Instead of separating precious metals from asteroid debris, they began crafting something far more dangerous. Across the human territories, similar scenes played out with quiet determination. Farmers on agricultural worlds began harvesting different crops. Medical researchers shifted their focus from healing to something more immediate. Even the children were part of it, though they didn't know it. their schools and games and innocent activities providing cover for preparations that had been years in the making. The genius of Protocol 7 lay not in its complexity, but in its inevitability. Every human settlement, every ship, every installation had been designed from the beginning to serve dual purposes. The infrastructure that sustained human life in the harsh environment of space could be rapidly converted into something that would ensure their enemies shared their fate. Admiral Crixthon's fleet began arriving in human space exactly 72 hours later, just as promised. The Imperial Armada was a sight to behold. Enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems arranged in perfect formation. Dreadnoughts the size of cities bristled with weapons that could crack planets. Support vessels carried armies of soldiers trained to subjugate rebellious populations. The first target was Haven Colony, the peaceful blue-green world that had been visible from the diplomatic station where the warning had been delivered. Admiral Crixthon himself commanded the assault fleet, confident that a swift demonstration of Imperial might would break human resistance across the sector. What they found waiting for them defied every tactical manual in the Imperial archives. The human defensive fleet was pathetically small, just a few dozen ships that should have been vaporized in the opening minutes of combat. But they didn't flee or surrender. Instead, they began what could only be described as a carefully choreographed dance of destruction. Human ships that should have been destroyed by the first Imperial volley instead seemed to absorb impossible amounts of damage. When they were finally destroyed, they didn't simply explode. They came apart in specific patterns, their debris spreading in predetermined directions that created hazards for pursuing Imperial vessels. "What are they doing?" demanded Admiral Crixthon, as his tactical displays showed the bizarre human behavior. "Are they trying to ram us with their wreckage?" His tactical officer, a chill-blooded Hylarian with thousands of battles under his belt, studied the patterns with growing unease. "Sir, their ships aren't exploding randomly, they're distributing something. Each destroyed vessel is releasing clouds of particulate matter that's spreading throughout our formation." Before the Admiral could demand clarification, the first human ship to reach critical damage did something unprecedented. Instead of trying to escape or fighting to the last, it simply vanished in a flash of light that temporarily blinded every optical sensor in the Imperial fleet. When their vision cleared, the Imperial officers found themselves facing something that violated their understanding of physics. Where the human ship had been, space itself seemed twisted, creating a gravitational anomaly that began pulling nearby Imperial vessels off course. "Impossible!" breathed the Admiral. "They're creating localized spatial distortions, but the energy requirements alone should have—" He never finished the sentence. Across the battlefield, more human ships were reaching their predetermined breaking points, and each one added to the growing chaos of twisted space and exotic matter. The Imperial formation, so perfect and overwhelming just minutes before, began to buckle under forces that their sensors couldn't even properly classify. On the surface of Haven Colony, the civilian population watched the battle through telescopes and sensor feeds with the calm resignation of people who had always known this day would come. They didn't flee to shelters or pray for rescue. Instead, they continued their daily routines with the mechanical precision of actors playing their final scene. In homes and schools, in hospitals and factories, humans went about the business of being human while their world died around them. Children attended classes where they learned about history they would never see continue. Doctors treated patients who would not live to see tomorrow's sunrise. Engineers maintained systems that would soon cease to exist. But every action, every moment of normalcy, every breath they took was contributing to something larger. The colony's entire infrastructure had been designed as a weapon of last resort, and now it was fulfilling its purpose with terrible efficiency. The orbital defense platforms that should have been shooting at the Imperial fleet instead began broadcasting something else entirely. Complex mathematical equations, star charts, and what appeared to be random data streams flooded every communications frequency. To the Imperial intelligence officers trying to decode it, the information seemed like the desperate ravings of a defeated enemy. They couldn't have been more wrong. The broadcasts weren't meant for Imperial ears. They were coordination signals for a plan that spanned multiple star systems, timing sequences for events that had been set in motion years before. Every human settlement was simultaneously implementing their part of Protocol 7, creating a network of destruction that would ensure the Empire's victory came at a price no civilization could afford to pay. Admiral Crixthon watched in growing horror as his tactical display, The Reckoning. The evacuation alarm aboard Admiral Crixthon's flagship pierced through the command center like a death knell, but it was far too late for retreat. The human trap had been sprung with mathematical precision, and now the Empire's mightiest fleet found itself caught in a web of physics turned weaponized. Commander Stone stood on the observation deck of the Defiant, watching the Imperial Armada struggle against forces they couldn't comprehend. Around him, his crew worked with the quiet efficiency of people who had accepted their own death as the price of freedom. The ship shuddered as another spatial distortion wave passed through their position, but they held their course toward the growing anomaly at the center of the battlefield. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, her voice steady despite the readings on her instruments that spoke of impossible energies being unleashed. "The cascade is at 60% completion. All human settlements in the sector are reporting successful implementation of their phases." Stone nodded grimly. Protocol 7 had never been tested at this scale because testing it would have meant destroying entire star systems. Now, as humanity faced extinction at the hands of the Empire, they were discovering that their desperate gamble was working exactly as their most brilliant minds had predicted. The weapon they had built wasn't really a weapon at all. It was humanity itself, transformed into something that could reach across the galaxy and touch every system the Empire controlled. Every human who had ever lived under Imperial rule, every colonist on distant worlds, every trader in far-off ports, they had all been part of an unconscious preparation for this moment. For generations, humans had spread across the galaxy not as conquerors, but as seeds. They had established trade relationships, cultural exchanges, and simple human presence in thousands of systems. They had been welcomed because they seemed harmless, just another species trying to find their place among the stars. What the Empire hadn't understood was that humans carried something with them wherever they went, the capacity for sacrifice that transcended self-preservation. Now, as the activation signals reached human populations throughout Imperial space, that capacity was being triggered simultaneously across the galaxy. "Admiral," his science officer reported with mechanical calm as the readings on his instruments climbed beyond all previous scales, "we're detecting similar anomalies beginning to manifest in over 3,000 systems throughout the Empire, all locations with significant human populations." Admiral Crixthon felt something he had never experienced in his centuries of conquest, the cold certainty of absolute defeat. Not military defeat, but the defeat of everything his species understood about warfare, civilization, and the natural order of the universe. The humans hadn't just turned their settlements into weapons. They had turned their entire diaspora into a galaxy-spanning instrument of mutual destruction. Every human trader who had ever sold goods in Imperial markets, every human researcher who had shared knowledge with alien scientists, every human artist who had performed for alien audiences, they had all been unknowing carriers of this ultimate contingency. On 1,000 worlds, humans were making the same choice their brothers and sisters had made at Haven Colony. They walked to their workplaces, kissed their families goodbye, and activated systems that would ensure their oppressors shared their fate. The cascade effect was spreading faster than any Imperial fleet could travel, jumping from system to system through quantum entanglement networks that humans had been quietly establishing for decades. The beauty of it was its simplicity. Humans didn't need to build massive weapons or field enormous armies. They just needed to be human, to carry within themselves the willingness to choose death over slavery. That willingness, multiplied across millions of individuals and thousands of worlds, became a force more devastating than any doomsday device. Stone watched through the Defiant's viewport as the spatial framework around Haven Colony reached critical mass. The mathematical structure built from destroyed ships and exotic matter was beginning to fold space itself, creating a region where the normal laws of physics no longer applied. "Sir," Captain Chen reported from her position at the tactical station, "we're receiving transmissions from Admiral Crixthon's flagship. They're requesting communication." Stone almost smiled. Even now, facing the collapse of everything they had built, the Empire still believed in the power of words to change reality. "Put him through." The Admiral's image flickered to life, distorted by the spatial distortions surrounding both vessels. His compound eyes showed the particular kind of panic that came from watching one's worldview collapse in real time. "Commander Stone," he began, his translator struggling with the emotion in his voice, "what you're doing will destroy everything. Not just our fleets, not just our empire, but entire star systems. Billions of innocent lives." Stone met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, it will. That's what makes it so terrible. That's why we warned you." "You can stop this!" the Admiral pleaded, his dignity cracking under the weight of species-ending terror. "Call off your people. We can negotiate, find a peaceful solution." "No," Stone replied quietly. "We can't. Because you've proven that you'll never see us as equals. You'll never accept that some things are worth dying for. You'll always believe that superior technology and greater numbers give you the right to dominate others." The spatial framework was beginning its final phase, and the effects were spreading beyond the local system. Quantum echoes were propagating through the galaxy's information networks, triggering similar events wherever humans had established their quiet presence. "This is madness," the Admiral whispered. Stone shook his head. "No, Admiral. This is what happens when you force a species with nothing left to lose to choose between freedom and survival. We're not mad. We're just willing to pay a price you never imagined anyone would pay." The transmission flickered and died as the growing anomaly interfered with all forms of communication. Around them, the Imperial fleet was being torn apart, not by weapons fire, but by the fundamental forces of reality being rewritten. Ships designed to withstand the heat death of stars found themselves unable to cope with space that no longer behaved according to their engineering assumptions. On the surface of Haven Colony, the last humans were completing their part of the protocol. In schools and hospitals, in homes and offices, people sat down to write final messages to whoever might someday find them. They wrote about their children, their dreams, their love for a universe that was about to become a much darker place. But they also wrote about choice, about the moment when a species decides that some things are more important than continuing to exist. They wrote about the terrible beauty of watching tyrants realize that their victims were willing to burn down the universe rather than kneel. The cascade reached its crescendo as quantum effects began propagating faster than light itself. In imperial capital worlds, in the great shipyards where the fleets that conquered galaxies were built, humans were making the same impossible choice. They were choosing oblivion over oppression, and their choice was becoming reality with the inexorable force of physics itself. Stone felt the defiant shudder as the spatial distortions reached their ship. Around him, his crew continued their duties with the quiet professionalism of people who had always known this was how their story would end. They weren't heroes in the traditional sense. They were just humans who had decided that freedom was worth any price. "Sir," Rodriguez reported as her instruments registered readings that shouldn't have been possible. The cascade has reached critical threshold. Imperial command networks are reporting system failures across 17% of their territory, and the effect is accelerating. Through the viewport, Stone could see the death of stars themselves as the quantum cascade spread beyond individual systems to affect the fundamental structure of space-time. The Empire's 1,000-year reign was ending not with conquest or revolution, but with the simple human refusal to accept that might made right. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to destroy humanity, the Empire had forced them to become something that could destroy everything else. The warning had been delivered in good faith, offering a path that would have allowed both species to coexist. But pride and arrogance had chosen a different course. As the Defiant began to come apart around him, Stone thought about the children who had played in Earth's parks centuries ago, never knowing that their descendants would someday face this choice. He thought about the first human who had looked up at the stars and dreamed of walking among them. He thought about all the possibilities that were ending here, and all the impossibilities that were beginning. The quantum cascade reached its final phase, and reality itself began to unravel in patterns that would reshape the galaxy. The great imperial fleets, the conquered worlds, the billion-year-old civilizations, all of it was being reduced to constituent energy by forces that humanity had learned to harness through the simple expedient of being willing to die for their beliefs. In the end, the humans had kept their promise. They had shown the Empire what happened when you threatened everything a human held dear. They had demonstrated the terrible price of forcing a species to choose between freedom and survival. The choice had been made, and now the universe would learn to live with the consequences, or it would learn to die with them. Either way, it would never again forget the lesson that some species, when pushed beyond all reasonable limits, were willing to take everyone else with them rather than surrender their souls. Commander Marcus Stone smiled as the last readings faded from his instruments. They had warned them to run. The Empire had chosen not to listen. Now nobody would run ever again. Began showing impossible readings. The spatial distortions created by the destroyed human ships weren't random. They were forming a pattern, a geometric structure that was growing larger and more complex with each passing minute. "Sir," his science officer reported with the calm professionalism of a being whose world was ending, "the humans appear to be constructing some kind of massive spatial framework. The energy levels they're beyond our ability to measure." The Admiral stared at the display, his compound eyes trying to process what he was seeing. The debris clouds, the gravitational anomalies, the exotic matter emissions from the destroyed human ships, they were all combining into something that defied every law of physics he understood. "What is it?" he demanded. The science officer's response came in a whisper that carried the weight of species-ending revelation. "I believe, sir, that they're building a weapon that will destroy this entire star system, including us." In that moment, Admiral Crixthon understood that the humans had been telling the truth from the beginning. They weren't bluffing about their willingness to sacrifice everything. They had turned their entire civilization into a trap, and the Empire had walked into it willingly. The choice had been made, and now everyone would live with the consequences. And that's what makes this so dangerous. You can conquer peoples who are bluffing. You can defeat enemies who are lying. But you can't stop someone who's telling you exactly what they're going to do to destroy you. The cargo ship completed its docking sequence below them, its innocent cargo of hope and healing a stark reminder of what hung in the balance. In that moment, Ambassador Vex Taral understood that this wasn't a negotiation between conqueror and conquered. This was a final warning before something irreversible was set in motion. The humans sat back in their chairs, having delivered their message. Now it was up to the Empire to decide whether wisdom or pride would guide their next move. But as Stone had learned in a lifetime of impossible victories, sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one who gave you a choice.